Hello everyone, and so just as promised, I am going to read Lolita's Christmas Angel. Let me put the cover a little bit closer so that you guys could see. This is the second book to the series, to my Lolita series. The first book I read yesterday was A is for Abuela, and then this is my second book, Lolita's Christmas Angel. I'm going to read the back cover, and it says, "It is my sincerest hope that teachers, students, and parents alike are inspired by Lolita, her family, and the wonderful teacher that never stops to include each and every one of her students in all that is done in the classroom. As you read about Lolita, I trust you will begin to understand the importance of a quality education that includes every student, even with language barriers." And it is my belief that with good instructional practices, those language barriers go closing as the years go on. And that was true in my life and in the life of a lot of English language learners that I know. So this book is dedicated to my grandparents for allowing me to have such wonderful memories, to both my parents, Ada and Mike Santana, who have never stopped believing in my dreams. Mom, thank you for being you and always and allowing us to dream big. This entire family stands and calls you blessed. May God always shine his light on this book and allow people from all parts of life to identify with at least one of its characters." And then I have a picture there of my mom and one of her grandchildren. It was Sunday afternoon, and Lolita's family had just gotten back from church. Lolita was excited because Abuela and Abuelo were coming over for Sunday lunch. Abuela and Mama were going to make her favorite dish, arroz con gandules, chuletas, and tostones, rice with chicken peas, pork chops, and fried plantains. Life, Lolita thought, could not get any better. Oh, but it did. As she was changing her Sunday clothes, Lolita couldn't help but overhear Mama and Abuela talking in the kitchen about Abuelo's decision to go to Cuba to visit his sister, who was very ill. Abuelo and Abuela were going to Cuba for the Christmas holidays and wanted to run it by Mama. From what Lolita could hear, Mama couldn't go. She had a lot of work and didn't want to leave Papa alone for the holidays. As Mama explained this to Abuela, Lolita thought, even if Mama isn't going, surely I'm going, because I always go with Abuelo and Abuela wherever they go. With that thought, Lolita started to pack. As she packed, she could still hear Mama talking to Abuela in a distance. "Ay, mamita," Lolita's mom explained, "cómo quisiera irme con ustedes a Cuba durante las Navidades, pero este año no voy a poder. Tengo mucho trabajo y Jorge no se puede quedar solo aquí sin nadie que lo atienda." It was a little sad that Mama couldn't go, but Lolita understood why. After all, Mama did have a lot of work to do, and Papa could not stay alone during the holidays. As she thought of leaving them, Lolita grew a little sad, but she continued packing. Lolita knew that going to Cuba with Abuelo and Abuela would be worth it. After all, she always went to Puerto Rico with Abuela, and now it was Abuelo's turn. Man, was she ever excited. She thought of all the things she could see. She knew Cuba was poor, but Abuelo always said that Cuban people, despite the poverty, were still happy. They knew how to make the most of a bad situation, that music and laughter were the medicine of the day every day. She could not wait. She loved dancing with Abuelo. Lolita danced salsa around her room and imagined what it would be like to visit Cuba. Once she packed, Lolita carefully put her suitcase under her bed and skipped to the kitchen where Mama, Papa, Abuelo, and Abuela were all getting ready to eat. This is her packing as she thinks she's gonna go. And this is them sitting at the table. She decided it would be best to wait until everyone stopped eating before she told them that she had already packed. As they ate, the conversation about the trip to Cuba was in full throttle. Abuelo was saying how it had been years since he had seen his beautiful sister and how he yearned to see his country. Abuelo knew Cuba was run down, and he knew that the living conditions were not the best, but still it was the island where he was born. Abuelo got sadder as he mentioned their lack of freedoms. Lolita knew Abuelo Miguel longed to see his family. He always talked about his family. It made Lolita sad to hear Abuelo talk about Cuba because somehow talking about his beloved country and the family he left behind made his usually loud, overbearing voice seem rather quiet and out of sorts. Lunch was somewhat over, and Lolita sat next to her two favorite people in the whole wide world quietly as she waited for her invitation to Cuba. However, her invitation never came. Everyone continued to talk as they finished up their food, and no one mentioned taking her. Lolita was feeling a little upset. She didn't know how to tell them that in all their adult talk, they forgot she was in the room. It was getting frustrating, so she decided to initiate the conversation herself. Abuelita, Lolita said in a high-pitched voice, ¿Qué día nos vamos a ir para Cuba y cuánto tiempo nos quedaremos? Grandma, when are we leaving to Cuba and how long will we be staying? The room grew silent as they processed all of Lolita's questions, and all eyes went from Mama to Lolita and from Lolita to Mama. It was a seriously awkward moment. As the awkwardness covered the room, everything grew silent and all eyes went to Papa. Lolita knew she wasn't going to like the outcome of this. Every time a tough decision was needed, it appeared that Papa was the guy for the job. Lolita, Papa said as he finished his last tostón, esta vez tú no puedes ir. Tienes clase y escuela es más importante para ti en este momento. Lolita felt as if the world had stopped. What did he mean she couldn't go this time because she had classes and her schooling was more important than this trip with Abuelo and Abuela? What could be more critical than Abuela? She was devastated. As tears flooded her eyes, Lolita felt Abuela's tender hand on her back. Then, without notice, Lolita heard some words she had never heard before. Lolita, tu papá tiene razón. With that one sentence, Abuela let Lolita know that Daddy's decision was final. Papa and Abuelo got up from the table, put the dishes in the sink, and made their way into the living room as Mama started washing the dishes, and Abuelita began making café con leche. Lolita was still sitting there, dazed and confused. How could Abuela not take her on this trip? She had always gone on their journeys. Lolita had gone with them everywhere, and now because of school she had to stay? Lolita was not a happy camper, and just as Abuela walked over to hug her, Lolita stormed out of the kitchen and ran into her room where she threw herself on the bed to cry. Lolita could hear Abuela following behind her, and she thought, if Abuela comes in my room, I will convince her to take me. But much to her surprise, Abuela didn't come into the room. She stood by the door and said, La verdad es que lo siento, Lolita. What did she mean she was sorry, Lolita thought. She could hear Abuela slowly walk back into the kitchen where she finished the café con leche. Lolita could hear them all talking in the distance, but this time she was too upset to eavesdrop. She'd talk to Abuela tomorrow after school when it would be just the two of them. Tomorrow, Lolita thought. Tomorrow I will convince Abuela to convince Papa that the best thing for me is to go with them, not to stay in school. Lolita knew everything would work out. It always did.